Welcome to Undercurrents, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Today's guest is Robbie Suave. Subscribe here, wherever you get your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. This week, we have a paywalled subscriber-only edition of the show episode on what happened on Capitol Hill over the last couple of days with the government shutdown. Now, on to today's episode. Just yesterday, Bloomberg reported that the Trump-friendly billionaire Frank McCourt is raising capital to make ByteDance an offer for TikTok. It may not matter, as McCourt himself knows. He could offer all the money in the world and ByteDance might not sell, or the impending ban could be blocked by the Supreme Court. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court delivered a potential lifeline to ByteDance, agreeing to hear its case that a ban passed by Congress and signed by Joe Biden is unconstitutional, and we'll hear that on January 10th. That law will shut down TikTok, get this, in the US on January 19th if it is not sold to a domestic company, a move that sought to disentangle the enormously popular platform from ByteDance's Chinese ownership amidst a brewing Cold War between the US and China. Bloomberg fleshed out McCourt's full court press, reporting, quote, "The plan is far from finalized and McCourt faces considerable obstacles to a possible deal. While he said he has interest from many of ByteDance's American shareholders to broker the bid, he still hasn't made inroads with ByteDance executives, despite efforts to strike up negotiations. He's also missing endorsements from key American investors like Jeff Yass, co-founder of Susquehanna International Group, who owns one of the largest stakes in ByteDance and is a major Trump donor." This could all matter a lot, of course, if TikTok just decides its case is looking weak at the Supreme Court and gets an offer it can't refuse, although that does seem unlikely at this point, given what we've seen so far. It could also matter a lot if the court upholds Biden's bipartisan ban. How then will incoming President Donald Trump, who is very friendly with Yas, handle that blow to the most popular social media platform in the country? That's, by the way, the day before the inauguration, January 19th deadline. What might the politics of this look like, and what should they look like? With, as of today, less than a month to go before this ban kicks in, our friend Robbie Soave of Reason is joining us to discuss. I had a great conversation with Robbie about what might happen. Stay tuned. I'm glad to say we are joined once again by our friend Robbie Suave. Thank you for joining us, Robbie.
Nice to be with you.
Now, we definitely disagree on TikTok, but we may not disagree on the particular law.
I stand with our president.
I know you do.
And Elon Musk and everyone.
You mean the impending president, not the
current
sitting president, who is not really alive, I guess?
Not even conscious, maybe. Who knows?
Does he know about TikTok? That's a sincere question.
I doubt that.
Could you explain TikTok to the sitting president, who forced essentially what will be a ban? Huge news, though, obviously, this week. The Supreme Court said that they would hear TikTok's case that the law Biden signed, it was totally a bipartisan law, was unconstitutional. They are going to hear that case on the 10th. Otherwise, TikTok will be banned on the 19th of January if it is not sold to a U.S. company. Robbie, why do you hate America and think that it should remain in the hands of the parent company ByteDance,
Sure.
which is obviously under the sway of a foreign adversary? There are all kinds of, there's been lots of reporting, and Forbes has had a lot of good reporting on this, that there are members of the Chinese Communist Party that are working at ByteDance. That's not surprising if you follow Chinese business. That's not surprising at all, actually. So why do you hate America? No, but seriously, defend it.
Well, there's a number of arguments made against TikTok, and I think some are more compelling than others.
Sure.
Look, I take seriously the national security implications. I think there are very few limits that should be put on speech, but national security is the purview of government. It's a legitimate purpose of the federal government. So fine, I'm all ears. I'll listen to the concerns. And I absolutely think the Chinese Communist Party will use TikTok to do suppression of views that are disfavorable to the Chinese government, just as they did with Google in China. Mm-hmm. You can't Google Tiananmen Square related topics. They've
surveilled journalists, for example.
They do that kind of stuff.
Forbes
I expect that is happening. In terms of the data collection, I can see how that is perhaps nefarious, although my understanding of this, and I'm by no means an expert, is that there are many ways to acquire such data on Americans, that we've kind of just opened this Pandora's box, that all the social media companies are collecting information on us about the kinds of purchases we make. I don't know how much power this gives a foreign adversary over us, but it's kind of just the way the world is going to be in the future. And then the like harms to children, addiction thing. Well, it's
if you're listening to this, he's putting that in.
That's the stuff I really roll my eyes at because A, there's nothing unique to TikTok about that, and in fact, I find TikTok less harmful on this front because it's more creative and collaborative, whereas Instagram is literally just looking at pretty pictures.
So it could be unique to TikTok though, if the Chinese government, and this is an if, we actually don't know this, if the Chinese government, which tightly controls Douyin, its version of TikTok, and pumps propaganda into the hour a day it lets children use TikTok, etc., if they're using it as like a social engineering tool, which again, we do not know, it's plausible, but it could be uniquely harmful if that was the case. If they were, as some Republicans and actually Democrats allege, there's an effort by members of the CCP to infiltrate TikTok and serve children suicide content, sell them drugs, etc. It's Robbie's grimacing,
like
but respond.
That's a lot. I mean, maybe I would need to see much more definitive proof that was taking place before I would say this kind of action would be taken. Usually when people are talking about the harms to children, they're talking very abstractly about the addictiveness of social media, which I totally support. Empowering parents to have more control over what their kids are looking at. I think schools should not have the phones in classrooms, just like you wouldn't have the Game Boy in a classroom. There's nothing rocket science about this, but I am extremely reticent to regulate in a panicked way new categories of communication that are clearly speech protected, on some level speech protected, especially for all of us. You're saying, well, some children have a hard psychological time on these platforms, so the U.S. government can take them away from everyone. That seems dubious. Our Supreme Court is very pro free speech in all of its myriad ways of existing, and I think this is going to be a tough case for them to decide that that there's enough evidence that TikTok gets around, because remember, the First Amendment is a limitation on what the government can do.
Right.
It's true that it's a foreign company, but the First Amendment is just saying the government cannot stop you, or you the private entity that wants to host this app on your platform. This is the government saying you can't do this with a speech-related product. That's going to be a tough sell to our Supreme Court.
Well, this was my next question, because I think you and I actually agree on probably more than we disagree, weirdly enough, on this issue. So how do you think this plays out in the Supreme Court, where Trump himself has sort of been the American right in a nutshell on the TikTok issue? Hardcore, hawkish against China, saying we need to ban this in that China context. Then he has a donor, Jeffrey Yass, who is a stakeholder in TikTok, the largest stakeholder in TikTok.
Jeffrey Yass Queen.
Jeffrey Yass Queen. He, to use his Christian name, he is advocating, obviously, for TikTok to remain untouched. But in this case, that is sort of the perfect encapsulation of where the right is, because it does raise some significant challenges, questions intellectually, as you've, I think, addressed here. So how does a conservative Supreme Court, 6-3, how does a Brett Kavanaugh, how does a Neil Gorsuch, people who actually have some bona fides from the libertarian speech wing, how did they deal with this? What's your prediction?
Exactly. It could go, I think, either way, but I would guess that they're going to decide it cannot be banned. And they're going through, and Trump himself, exactly as you said, has gone through both sides of this. This debate really does showcase the divide, or the debate, the ideological intellectual debate taking place between the more NatCon right and the more libertarian right, represented by J.D. Vance and Elon Musk and other ideological figures who are really in a kind of friendly, spirited debate battle for what the second Trump administration is going to look like. And I would just again say, and I think Trump has realized this, and part of his rationale for changing his mind here is his combativeness with Facebook. A lot of the sins we are putting on, saying that China would do to TikTok, it has been proven and demonstrated that the American government did to our tech companies. So forgive me if I'm not jumping up and down, exclaiming how horrible it is that China might be, China bad, Chinese government bad, very likely was doing these things. Our FBI, our CDC, our State Department, they're still trying to reauthorize the Republicans' funding somehow for an agency involved in this, for our own government bureaucrats telling our American social media companies to censor speech, and that's been totally exposed. So let's put our own house in order. We can control that. We can fire those agents. We can defund those agencies. We can set clear rules for how law enforcement and intelligence and health advisors are supposed to interact with social media companies. We can do all that. The Congress could do that. That'd be great. Rather than this kind of like nebulous foreign censorship threat seems a little bit far-flung compared to what we've seen, what we've dealt with.
And it's, of course, a question of precedent as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that will come up at the Supreme Court. How do you expect to see, or what do you expect to see from Donald Trump in the weeks ahead? Someone who, this is really interesting, J.D. Vance too, who has actually also recently talked about how he's come to see his own popularity on TikTok through this lens of the death of the gatekeepers, that TikTok is powerful enough. And who knows, maybe ByteDance allowed TikTok to tweak the algorithm to win Trump's favor. That is a serious possibility.
Possible.
Yeah, over the course of the election, because Trump stuff was going very viral on a platform. We're used to, quote unquote, young people being very left. That's not quite the case
It's not
anymore.
true anymore.
Yeah, it's not quite the case anymore. Even though TikTok is very skewed in the direction of the Palestinian activists against Israel. It's a very interesting, jungle, wild, wild west.
It's interesting, but I see that on YouTube too, hosting a YouTube-based show discussing that issue, where I was...
Have you talked about that before on your show, on Rising?
Yeah, it might have come
You've
up
had conversations.
once or twice. We've had some conversation. Me being the relative, even though I wouldn't describe myself as reflexively pro-Israel or something, I'm just not an expert on this issue, but I was less agreed with by people who usually follow me or watch on YouTube than on a lot of other issues. So I think a lot of complaining about has the algorithm been tweaked against me? I hear that a lot from liberals, frankly.
Yeah.
With what you're talking about with
yeah.
TikTok.
I don't think that's true.
And then also with X, well, it can be a both effect where if liberals leave the platform, the people still on the platform are more conservative. It's feeding the people there more conservative content because that's what the user base wants. It would be surprising to me. Obviously, the government could interfere with it or something. Maybe the Chinese government is interfering with it. But these platforms do want to make money. So they're mostly just showing you more of the kind of content you want to engage with. So I think the Occam's razor explanation for why you're getting more Trump or more Palestine or more whatever is that there are more people wanting to see that kind of stuff. Honestly, I think that's, in most cases, going to be probably the explanation.
Well, I think it tracks with polling as well.
Yeah.
So Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and now kind of the MAGA wing seems to have decided that they're basically pro-TikTok. Do you expect that to last?
I mean, if TikTok does something to really tick off Donald Trump, then no. Mark Zuckerberg's been trying to make nice with him in a way that I actually find appealing and good. I've always been a little defensive of Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know.
Weird.
I don't know why.
What's your problem?
Well, you put anyone in front of
blonde.
Is he blonde? He's a robot.
I don't know. He probably doesn't have hair.
He's finally found a cool look for him though. That kind of surfer
no,
bro vibe.
It's not cool.
Well, it's cooler than the
Sorry,
robot
Mark.
vibe where he had the.
Oh,
anyway,
the Caesar haircut?
Yeah, that was bad.
Yeah, that wasn't good.
It's because when he goes before Congress, or any tech CEO goes before Congress,
Yes.
and they're pelted with questions from Republicans and Democrats, people who don't understand their product whatsoever, is me pushed into my most Ayn Rand sort of he should go on intellectual strike, refuse to do any. He should escape to the woods and form a community of tech people who are beyond the reach of the Wesley Mooches. Do you know?
This is Robbie exploding into a puddle of Four Loko on air.
Yes, delicious Four Loko.
R.I.P. R.I.P. Another thing. Gone too soon.
Taken out of our hands by hateful government bureaucrats.
So, last question for you, Robbie, before you run, is that I actually wrote a piece for Unheard this week about a couple of moves I've seen from the right that give me some pause when it comes to whether the free speech party that we've had on the right for the last 10 years as culture has kind of clamped down. Now that Trump feels like the cultural wind, TikTok and elsewhere, is at his back, I'm not worried at all about the defamation lawsuit against George Stephanopoulos. I am worried about the Inspector General report that came out a couple weeks ago about Bill Barr's DOJ improperly spying on journalists. I'm worried about Ken Paxton subpoenaing 404 Media. Paxton's obviously a Trump ally. They killed the Press Act, which I thought was a great bill to protect journalist sources. How do you think the great free speech debate that really came to define the right in the era of cancel culture plays out in a second Trump administration?
Yeah, I would hope they would be very cautious here and pull back. Now that they're the winning team again, it's one thing to inveigh against the media and criticize media bias, and really they should leave that now to the professionals like us because they're in charge of the government again. Like, you can make fun of, Ann Seltzer, humiliated, has to go on an ice float and send off into the ocean. Do we need to sue the Des Moines Register? I mean, this is so clearly, like, not a good lawsuit.
No,
right? They had a poll that was wrong. It was
consumer fraud.
Yeah, this is nuts.
Yeah.
If consumer fraud covers that consumer fraud statute is unconstitutional.
If being a bad journalist is consumer fraud, the class action lawsuits that are about to be filed.
Right. And by liberals against the right as well. So let's be careful.
Yeah.
If we just spent years complaining, often correctly, about the weaponization of the legal system, the Justice Department, deep state bureaucrats, whatever, fix those things, concentrate on establishing transparency and accountability and cutting where we need to cut, serve the American people in that way. There's a clear mandate to do this. An endless revenge tour against everyone who spoke out against Trump is not going to be a good use of anyone's time. And so I hope, for instance, Kash Patel, who I really like and has great ideas, I think, about shrinking some of the intelligence agencies under his purview, do that, not like media witch hunts against people who criticized him.
Robbie Suave, so well said. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's edition of Undercurrents. Make sure to subscribe here on the channel, wherever you download your podcasts, and of course over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium edition of the show, the full premium experience of the show. There is an edition of the show posted up there just as a reminder on government shutdown negotiations. So if you're a subscriber, head on over, and if you're not, you can head on over to undercurrents.tv to watch that and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and we will be back with more Undercurrents soon. We have a great lineup of holiday shows, by the way, so you're definitely going to want to subscribe. Some of my very favorite thinkers are going to be joining us here on the program. Make sure to stay tuned for that. See you soon.